Now, the Trump administration is now attempting to re-engage with Iran through diplomatic means, particularly regarding Iran's nuclear program. However, you have the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the US war hawks that are unhappy with Trump's approach to this, and they are pushing Trump to abandon this diplomacy and take military action on Iran. Now, the US policy for the past few decades on Iran has been that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon, and most of the European countries were on board with that. But then you have the neocons and the Israelis that want to make a regime change in Iran. Now, back in 2015, President Obama had signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, also known as the Iran nuclear deal. It was a bipartisan support from the Western countries and the US, in which they had agreed upon that Iran should commit to its halting of its uranium enrichment and ceasing its pursuit of nuclear weapons. But then you had Netanyahu and the pro-Israeli figures within the US political establishment that was strongly opposed to the deal. Under the JCPOA, Iran agreed to reduce its number of centrifuges by 2/3, only allowed to enrich uranium up to 3.67% purity, enough for a civilian energy far below weapons grade, limit of 300 kilograms of low enriched uranium stockpile for 15 years. The International Atomic Energy Agency was granted regular access to Iran's nuclear facilities, use of advanced monitoring technology, and transparency measures. In exchange for compliance, Iran received sanction reliefs, lifting of UN, EU, and US nuclear-related sanctions, unfreezing of Iranian assets abroad, allowing Iran to re-enter the global oil and financial markets. If the true goal was to prevent Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, the JCPOA was highly effective. But instead of supporting this diplomatic approach, Netanyahu and his allies were displeased, and they were constantly advocating for an aggressive stance against the Iranian regime. Now, Netanyahu actively tried to dissuade Obama from making the deal, preferring instead a strategy aimed at regime change in Iran, an idea that many hawks in Washington, D.C. had supported. Now, when Donald Trump ran in the 2016 election, he too was also in opposition to the Iran nuclear deal, and he would promise in his campaign that he would withdraw from the JCPOA. So then in 2018, Trump pulled the US out of the deal, despite the fact Iran was still complying with its terms and had not pursued nuclear weapons.
Trump announced the U.S. would withdraw from the Iran nuclear agreement. It was one of his signature campaign promises and a key aspect of President Obama's legacy.
The United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal. In a few moments, I will sign a presidential memorandum to begin reinstating U.S. nuclear sanctions on the Iranian regime. We will be instituting the highest level of economic sanction. Any nation that helps Iran in its quest for nuclear weapons could also be strongly sanctioned by the United States.
Now, ironically, Trump appears interested in reviving negotiations with Iran, hoping to limit its uranium enrichment program once again. Now, this shift towards diplomacy started frustrating the Israeli government and the war hawks in DC. In early January, Trump had sent his special envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff, to Israel in an effort to start the peace negotiation between Hamas and Israel. Now, this irritated the Israelis, and they were unhappy with Steve Witkoff, and tensions between Witkoff and the Israeli leadership affected. Now, despite all of this, Trump is still trying to renegotiate with Iran on its nuclear program. He had sent Steve Witkoff to Iran to reopen for a new nuclear agreement. Now remember, whatever deal Trump pursues right now will be similar to the JCPOA. One of the reasons why Trump killed the JCPOA, it was because Obama had made the deal, and Trump despises Obama. Now at the same time, Netanyahu and the war hawks are still pressuring Trump, warning against anything that resembles an Obama deal. And they're constantly telling Trump that, oh, it's like an Obama deal. And Trump does not like that. So you have the Israelis and the war hawks backpedaling Trump, and they want Trump to stop re-engaging with the Iranian regime on its nuclear program, but rather take a military action on Iran and overthrow the regime. Now remember, countries that have uranium are able to enrich its uranium, even though the war hawks in DC want Iran to enrich 0% uranium. Like for example, on the Non-Nuclear Weapons Act, a country can use nuclear technology only for peaceful purposes, allow the IAEA inspections and safeguard to verify the compliance. Weapons development or secret enrichment violates the NPT and the international law. So in short, Iran does pursue on enriching uranium. It should be transparent and should be monitored peacefully. Now this has led to the current crisis, where you have the hawks in Washington and the Israeli government firmly opposed to the deal that permits Iran to enrich uranium. Netanyahu in particular envisions a Libya-style disarmament for Iran, essentially demanding complete nuclear dismantle.
אני מסיים עכשיו ביקור שני בארצות הברית תוך חודשיים, ביקור חם מאוד עם ידידי הנשיא דונלד טראמפ. יכולתם להתרשם מהקרבה הגדולה והידידות הגדולה בינינו, והיא באה לידי ביטוי בנושאים שדיברנו. קודם כל איראן. אנחנו מסכימים שלאיראן לא יהיה נשק גרעיני. זה יכול לעשות בהסכם, אבל רק אם ההסכם הזה הוא הסכם נוסח לוב, שנכנסים, מפוצצים את המתקנים, מפרקים את כל המכשורים, בפיקוח אמריקני, בביצוע אמריקני, זה טוב. אפשרות שנייה, שזה לא יהיה, שהם סתם יגררו את השיחות, ואז האופציה היא צבאית. כולם מבינים את זה, על כך דנו באריכות.
But remember what had happened to Gaddafi in Libya. Once Gaddafi had given up his nuclear enrichment, he was sodomized in public roads and was easily overthrown by the US government at the time. And when Netanyahu talks about the Libyan-style disarmament, this insinuates for the mullahs in Iran that they do not want to be in the same fate as Gaddafi, essentially being overthrown or killed. Now, at the same time, Iran is constantly insisting that it should have some capacity to enrich uranium for its civilian development or other purposes, such as energy or medical research. However, you have the hardliners in the US and the Israelis that reject even limited enrichment, and they want Iran to have a complete shutdown of any enrichment of uranium. Now, this leaves Trump in a difficult position because on the one side, you have the Israeli government and its allies that are pushing to launch a military strike on Iran and even pursue a regime change in Iran. Because at this time, Trump has reinstated the sanctions on Iran, which has weakened Iran's economy. So the Israelis and the war hawks are pressuring Trump that this is the best time to attack Iran and overthrow the regime in Iran. Now, this was the key reason why it led to the dismissal of Mike Waltz, because he was working behind Trump's back on working behind the scenes to develop war plans against Iran with the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So when Trump found that out, he immediately fired Mike Waltz. So recently when Trump visited the Middle East, Trump sought to reshape the regional landscape. He negotiated with the Sunni Gulf states on a new vision for peace and secured the release of an American hostage held by Hamas. However, this diplomatic approach angered the neoconservative in Washington, so Trump publicly distanced himself from the past administration that pursued on regime changes, like for example Bush in Iraq and Obama in Libya and Syria. And he had stated in his speech that
And it's crucial for the wider world to note this great transformation has not come from Western interventionists or flying people in beautiful planes giving you lectures on how to live and how to govern your own affairs. No, the gleaming marvels of Riyadh and Abu Dhabi were not created by the so-called nation builders, neocons, or liberal nonprofits like those who spent trillions and trillions of dollars failing to develop Kabul, Baghdad, so many other cities. Instead, the birth of a modern Middle East has been brought by the people of the region themselves, the people that are right here, the people that have lived here all their lives, developing your own sovereign countries.
Now, this stance drew backlash from the hawkish element from Trump's own party and the political establishment that still advocates for regime changes in the Middle East. Now, according to Axios, on Saturday evening, when Steve Witkoff was negotiating with the Iranian on Iran's nuclear program, US nuclear deal offer allows Iran to enrich uranium. So whatever deal they make, it will still be similar to the JCPOA. But right now, it will depend on how much of uranium Iran is allowed to enrich. White House envoy Steve Witkoff and the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, have said publicly that the US will not allow Iran to enrich uranium and will demand the full dismantle of Iran's nuclear facilities. The secret proposal shows far more flexibility on both points. Iran has consistently said that it won't sign any deal that bans enrichment for civilian purposes, a red line that is irreconcilable with the US public posture. By making this offer, the Trump administration is risking backlash from its allies on the Hill and in Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government and dozens of Republican senators have pushed the administration to maintain red lines on zero nuclear enrichment and the full dismantle of Iran's nuclear program. President Trump has made it clear that Iran can never obtain a nuclear program. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has sent a detailed and acceptable proposal to the Iranian regime, and it's in their best interest to accept it. Out of respect for the ongoing deal, the administration will not comment on details of the proposal to the media. Under the proposal, Iran will not be allowed to build any new enrichment facilities and must fully dismantle its critical infrastructure for conversion and processing of uranium. The proposal also states that Iran would have to halt its new research and development on centrifuge. Iran will not be allowed to develop domestic enrichment capabilities beyond those necessary for civilian purposes. Now remember, under the international law, a country that is able to enrich uranium can enrich uranium if they are compliant to the international law. But at this point in time, the US position is that Iran cannot enrich any sort of uranium. After signing the agreement, Iran will have to temporarily reduce its enrichment concentration to 3%. This period will be agreed upon negotiation. President Trump cautioned Netanyahu to not to do anything that would harm the negotiation. Netanyahu advocated for military action against Iran's nuclear facilities and has been preparing to strike swiftly if the talks collapse. So Netanyahu is ready to take military action if the deal collapses, even though Trump has told Netanyahu not to do anything on it.
Back on Iran, did you warn Prime Minister Netanyahu against taking some sort of actions that could disrupt the talks there in a phone call last week?
Well, I'd like to be honest. Yes, I did. Next question, please.
Just on sanctions.
I did, yeah.
If Senate Republicans want to push
It's not a warning. I said I don't think it's appropriate.
What exactly did you tell him? Did you
I just said I don't think it's appropriate. We're having very good discussions with him, and I said I don't think it's appropriate right now. Because if we can settle it with a very strong document, very strong, with inspections and no trust. I don't trust anybody. I don't trust anybody. So no trust. I want it very strong where we can go in with inspectors. We can take whatever we want. We can blow up whatever we want, but nobody getting killed. We can blow up a lab, but nobody's going to be in the lab, as opposed to everybody being in the lab and blowing it up, right? Two ways of doing it. Yeah, I told him this would be inappropriate to do right now because we're very close to a solution. Now, that could change at any moment, could change with a phone call. But right now, I think they want to make a deal, and if we can make a deal, save a lot of lives.
At this point in time, Iran is on the brink of rejecting the US deal. They want to enrich uranium for its civilian program. Iran is on the brink of rejecting US proposal on the future of its nuclear program after the US draft insisted that Tehran would have to suspend the enrichment of uranium inside Iran and set out no clear route map for lifting US economic sanctions. Iran is drafting a negative response to the US proposal. Coincidentally, then you have Fox News coming out with the secret footage, which is only obtained by them, that all of a sudden shows Iranian nuclear sites while the negotiations are still happening. So could this be a push towards a regime change?
Fox News exclusive satellite images revealing the location of a previously unknown Iranian nuclear site. Now, the facility spans nearly 2,500 acres, and this is a big discovery. Jillian Turner has more from the State Department. Good morning, Jillian.
Pretty explosive, Dana. These satellite images that we have obtained exclusively show the alleged site location and even the layout of the secret, previously unknown nuclear weapons facilities inside Iran. This, of course, raises fresh concerns about the regime's role in these ongoing nuclear talks with the Trump administration. The National Council of Resistance of Iran has collected intelligence from sources on the ground inside Iran that locate this nuclear weapons facility in what is called Semnan province, far from the regime's already known nuclear sites. It's codenamed the Rainbow Site by Iran's officials, and it spans nearly 2,500 acres.
Press conference by Lindsey Graham stated that Iran cannot enrich any sort of uranium. Even though earlier it was stated by the DNI Tulsi Gabbard, Iran does not have nuclear weapons. For the past 25 years, you have the war hawks in DC and the Israeli government, especially Benjamin Netanyahu, that has insisted that Iran is 2 weeks away from getting a nuclear weapons. And then you had the Tulsi Gabbard report coming out at the time stating that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, but is able to obtain a nuclear weapon if it wills so. Disagreements on Iran, Gaza straining Trump-Netanyahu relationship. Trump lifted a hold on the Biden administration, had put on sending large bombs to Israel. He encouraged Israeli military operation to finish the job against Hamas in Gaza. He agreed with Netanyahu on confronting Iran and its proxies group in the region. But in recent weeks, the relationship between Trump and Netanyahu has become strained, as the two leaders are increasingly at odds over a strategy for tackling these challenges now that Hamas has been significantly degraded and Iran weakened. When Netanyahu sees an opportunity to finally take out Iran's nuclear facilities, Trump sees an opportunity to remove the threat of Iran acquiring a nuclear weapon by making a deal. As Israel hits Gaza with new military offensive, Trump is pushing for a ceasefire and looking to implement his post-war plan for rebuilding the area into a Riviera of the Middle East. And after Trump halted the US military campaign against the Iranian-backed Houthi militant group, a shocked Netanyahu said Israel would then defend itself. Netanyahu was particularly upset when Trump said Wednesday that he had yet to decide whether Iran would be allowed to enrich uranium under a new nuclear deal his administration is negotiating. For his part, Trump has been frustrated with Netanyahu's decision to begin a new military offensive in Gaza, where the president sees as at odds with his plan for rebuilding there. The US is currently pushing Israel and Hamas to agree to a ceasefire in Gaza. But Trump's approach to Iran has been the biggest point of contention for Netanyahu. The Israeli leader has been frustrated for weeks with Trump's refusal to support military strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities and his decision to instead reach a deal aimed at blocking Tehran from acquiring nuclear weapons. They are worried about any deal, one of the US officials said of the Israelis. Israel has made clear to the US that it does not want Trump to cut a nuclear deal that leaves Iran with uranium enrichment capabilities. The US officials and the Middle Eastern diplomats said Trump has expressed an openness to Iran maintaining a civil nuclear program. We haven't made the decision yet, Trump said. When Netanyahu visited the White House last month, for the second time since Trump took office, he hoped the president would pledge US air support for the possible Israeli operation against Iran's nuclear facilities. The Israeli leader was taken aback when the president announced he would agree to direct talks with Tehran. Netanyahu has privately said he thinks Trump's negotiations with Iran are a waste of time because Tehran will never hold any deal. Israel has argued that Iran is so weakened by economic sanctions and the degradation of its proxies in the region, and that now is an ideal moment to take out its nuclear facilities, and is concerned that the window of doing so is closing while the US is negotiating. According to concern about timing, Israeli military strikes crippled Iranian strategic air defenses in October. Republican Senator Tom Cotton and Lindsey Graham said this week the only acceptable Iran's deal is one that completely stops Tehran from any uranium enrichment. They also urged Trump to submit any Iran nuclear deal to the Senate for ratification. You see, Netanyahu and the political establishment in DC view Iran completely weak at this point in time, because most of Iran's proxy in the region have dealt a devastating blow. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and Bashar al-Assad has been overthrown by the new government in Syria. So Iran's proxies in the region has dealt a devastating blow. So Netanyahu views this as the perfect time to take military action on Iran. But remember, in order to take out Iran's nuclear facilities, they would have to send ground troops into Tehran, because most of Iran's nuclear facilities are under deep mountains. Trump does not want to repeat what happened in Afghanistan and in Iraq that costed the United States over $10 trillion. Trump does not want to see the same fate, because after the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan, it led to the US financial collapse in 2008. So right now, the United States is at $37 trillion of debt. And with the ongoing tariff war with the rest of the countries, any military action on Iran will lead to global instability in the market. The United States does perceive on taking military action on Iran, the Iranian regime will simply blow up the oil supplies in the Sunni Gulf states, which will lead to the supply of oil down and the demand up, and will result in global inflation. And now Trump sees that, because any invasion from the United States to Iran will lead to global instability in the markets, because Iran can drop B-52 and B-2 bombers on the Sunni Gulf states' oil infrastructure. Remember, Iran is 4 times the size of Iraq. The invasion of Iraq led to the instability in the region, and then led to the rise of ISIS, as it led a power vacuum to be filled there. Now Trump does not want to make the same mistakes his predecessors make, like Bush and Obama. So instead, Trump is trying to renegotiate with the Iranian on its nuclear program. But then you have the political establishment in DC and Netanyahu, and the former son of Shah Reza Pahlavi, who view this as the perfect time to take military action on Iran.
Your Highness, I think when you said a moment ago, we have to underline this, Iran is at its weakest. The people have risen. The people want change. You've had this Iranian truck drivers on strike right now, and the strikes are continuing this week.
Yes.
Today, protests first broke out last week. They've spread to 130 cities across 30 provinces. They're standing against a rise in insurance premiums, poor road security, high fuel prices, and low freight rates. Middle East experts are urging the Trump administration to support this strike. You've said nonviolent civil disobedience like this can bring down the regime. Do you expect that? How much more significant does this need to get to bring down the regime?
Well, you know, it's always has been my school of thought that nonviolent civil disobedience is the best method to achieve a peaceful end, as well as bringing the least cost possible to the nation achieving that end, versus other scenarios of armed struggle or what have you, or as a result of foreign invasions or occupation. The Iranian people are ready today to go beyond this regime. They are demanding that, and every signal that they send to the whole world is, listen, we are the agent of change. We are the people you should cut a deal with, not this regime. We are on the streets fighting. We are protesting. And it's not just because they have reasons to protest,
but rather dismissing what could lead to a calamity if the US does invade Iran and take out its nuclear facilities. So which side would Trump side on? Would he side with the neocons in his party and the Israeli government and the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and make the same mistake that his two predecessors had made, Obama and Bush, of re-engaging in nation building, which has led to a collapse failure for the past 20 years? Or would he try to negotiate with Iran on its nuclear program and come up with a diplomacy rather?